So hey folks, yes, here on beautiful Hollywood Beach. It's a bit warm, yeah, okay. I'm kind of weird, okay, so bear with me. Yeah, it's hot coffee. Don't ask me why, but I tend to like my coffee hot. I'm not a big latte guy. I'm not a big, how should I say, not a big cold coffee type of guy. Although there are exceptions. Give me a cold brew, that's a different issue. But again, thank you to everyone over, of course, at the wonderful gang, to everyone that is involved with Commentator that has been so amazing during this time, as they are a major supporter of what's going on here. So ask me anything. I had two questions that stood out this week that were kind of interesting. I might start out, well, you know, I'm going to start out with the first one that ends up being a little bit more, I guess, I don't have to create as many controversies, and also not only that, it's more straightforward when it comes to what's going on in football in actuality. So our first question, of course, is explain it to me like a 5-year-old. Of course, the context behind it is there was a tweet that was written by yours truly following up on what was going on in a meeting between Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, and Gianni Infantino. Of course, the plan is, according to Javier Milei and many other politicians in Argentina. Now, there's two sides to this, so I don't want to sound like I'm in favor or against as I adjust things here as I go. Sorry about that. There are two sides to this, okay? So it has to be very well understood exactly why there are people that are for and against the privatization of teams. They're called Sociedades Anónimas Deportivas in Spanish, which are basically, a direct translation, are anonymous sporting societies, or it's basically the privatization of certain entities, sporting entities. Keep in mind, and again, I mentioned this a lot, I have to put my sunglasses on, I can't. The reflection of the sand is just hitting me. Argentine clubs are non-profits, okay? Argentine clubs are non-profits. They're non-profit organizations. They are social clubs, and it's basically like it's a sporting club. It's where you go to spend some time, where they do have different teams, they have different activities, where they have different social support groups for communities within the neighborhood, that type of thing. That's how football in Argentina, it's one of the Argentine football is very grassroots in that perspective, because it's not only a place where footballers come to be, it's also where families come to make connections with community. It's all of this. It's where if your kid is interested in the sport, they go do it. I mean, Boca, River, I'll give you those two examples first, and I can probably expand a little bit more. Number one, Boca's not just football. Boca have basketball. They have they have, off the top of my head, I think it's something like 20 different sports, if I'm not mistaken. River, about the same, some more, some less. Some they do have, some they don't have. Some have swimming, some have ping pong, some have those things. River, for example, have a school. They have a school, kindergarten through 12th grade, that and even tertiary programs that they do implement within the club to help students. I mean, River has one of the biggest schools in Argentina when it comes to the amount of students that are part of it. Many of their players, many of their members, many of their club members have had their kids go to River to attend school. So, I mean, a lot of their athletes go to school at River. I mean, there's a whole educational support staff that is established at River for that area of the club. There are many others. They have futsal, they have summer camps, they have all of that. It's if you live in the United States, it's like a YMCA. It's one a police athletic league, if you want to call it that, but it's a more community oriented with several different programs. It's more like a YMCA, if you will. It's like if a YMCA had a professional football team, okay, or a professional basketball team, which those are the cases. Professional futsal, okay. You look in Europe, and similar things are Sporting Lisbon, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Galatasaray. Those types of clubs all have not just football; they have other sports as well. Barcelona's basketball, handball, roller hockey. Real Madrid also has football, men's and women's. On top of that, they have basketball. They have a lot of other team sports, a lot of club-oriented sports as well. That is a major backbone because it's not only a facet of Argentine football that is so important, it's also a big part of Argentine society. Many of the presidents, many of the leaders have the affiliation with clubs because of that. They grew up at whatever club, at San Lorenzo. They grew up at Racing. They grew up at Independiente, going there and eating lunch and playing with their friends and going to the community pool. And that's where their affiliation, it's not just because the team won trophies or not, it's much more than that. It's a much more deeper association between the club and the individual, the club and the community. And when they say, you know, like you hear in MLS a lot, oh yeah, it's for the city. Well, yeah, but it's a private entity, and they don't have as much affiliation with the community as, let's say, a Boca or a River, because they do go into the community literally and help youth to avoid certain things, help the families be able to play together and stay together and create links and lifetime bonds with certain individuals and certain other families that are at the club. Okay, that's the romantic part. That doesn't generate a great deal of money when you start looking at the business that football's become. The amount of monthly memberships, when you pay your dues monthly at a club like that, it ends up being very complicated to maintain that, and also to maintain a competitive club as well. That's just the reality. If not enough money's trickling in, well, the investment's going to be very poor. So what happens? You have to start looking for other avenues. In many cases, it's the privatization. In many cases, it's being, now, when you deal with a club of that ilk, you don't have the possibility of bringing in foreign investment, or which is what Javier Milei has been looking to do, which is what Mauricio Macri has been looking to do since basically 1995. When you bring in people like this, yeah, you bring in, there's been a lot of rumors that there's some Qatari investors interested in Newell's Old Boys and Independiente and River and whatever. I mean, that list will probably expand more likely than not. But when you bring in investors, what ends up happening? You end up having to succumb to the will of the investor, especially if they're putting in big money. Which means, well, I give you this money, therefore you can't spend it. You can spend it on this, and therefore not that. Honestly speaking, there's going to be investors that are going to be interested in saying, you know what, let's take away this social benefit from this club. Let's start scrapping things. And that's where people in Argentina are afraid that the essence of the club, the essence of the community ends up being eroded in the long run when it starts being looked at from that perspective, the money first and money only perspective, which is understandable if you look at it from a business perspective, because I put in 1, 2, 10, 5, 50, 100, 200 million euros, dollars, or whatever it may be. Well, that ends up being a problem for the club member, because they still want to maintain the legitimacy of the institution. But at the same time, you have to succumb to certain issues when somebody comes in and starts investing money and starts in putting big money and wants to bring in certain players. And yet there's a fine balance that has to be seesawed back and forth between having a club that is for the members, but also a team that's competitive. And everyone knows that everybody wants their team to be competitive. Everybody wants their team to be in Libertadores. Everybody wants their team to be fighting for the league title. And okay, so what do? A lot of clubs that don't have maybe the political clout within, it's easy to bring an investor in and spend millions and millions and invest millions and millions. But the problem is that, in theory, how I'm talking about, it works. In reality, investors are going to put in the money. As soon as the profits come in, they go and they take it, and they take it somewhere else instead of reinvesting in a lot of cases. There's a lot of cases of Assad, or of what I'm talking about, where it's been very, very productive. There have been some that haven't, especially in South America. Independiente del Valle is a very good example. I mean, what they've been able to do, you've had people that have invested intelligently there, and they've been able to earn money off of transfers. Of course, I can start out with Moises Caicedo going to Chelsea all the way down. Going to Brighton and eventually going to Chelsea. But then you also go and start looking at players or teams that have, Montevideo City Torque, although it is part of City Football Group, it's been a disaster how it's run, so much so that the team ended up going into relegation last year in Uruguay. So you have a lot of, for every bad example, I can give you one that's a good one. Or maybe for every 2 or 3 bad examples, there is a good one. Especially if you go to South America, the ratio changes drastically. You can talk about Red Bull, you can talk about a lot of Red Bull Salt, you can talk about the Red Bull teams, you can maybe talk about some of the City Group teams. And they have had more successes than failures. But the fear in Argentina is that it ends up being something for people outside, and then the more money that's being generated by Argentine football, by the league, by the clubs, well, the money goes outside. It never stays in and gets reinvested, because if there's something Argentine football needs, is reinvestment in the clubs, reinvestment in the structures, reinvestment in the league itself. If you start looking at Argentine league pitches, there are some that have just very poor conditions in terms of how they're playing, updating certain aspects of training grounds, getting more cameras, better technology in place, seeing if stadiums can get renovated, upgraded even. Those are issues that are very real. And when you start bringing in investors from the outside, I don't know if they're willing to go that extra mile to do so. But maybe I'll get political on this one for just a second. The main access entry point for investors abroad to get into Argentina is football. Because football is not the end game in Argentina. I hope that I'm coming across here. That the biggest thing in Argentina is football. It's a big business, but it's a big gateway to many other things. And many start looking at things. Of course, we see how Elon Musk is already looking at Argentina in terms of lithium. We see how the Qataris are also looking at lithium mines and properties in Argentina. All this. And again, I'm not trying to sound like I'm in favor or against anyone. I'm just giving you the facts so you can kind of be able to analyze it yourself. It's an entry point to other industries that can be much more profitable for the people that are investing in football. I just gave you 2 examples: property, real estate, which basically is the same thing, could be, and also lithium, and also seeing what other resources could be available, and being able to access or tap into certain markets that can offer a very cheap and accessible labor market in some cases. It goes pretty much counter to what Argentina's been about over the past 50, 60, 70 years when it comes to the protectionism that they have within their country, within their government, and the hoops that many foreign companies have to go through in order to be able to invest, be able to bring their companies, and not only bring them in, maintain them, knowing that there are a lot of bureaucratic and diplomatic loopholes that make things almost impossible to deal with on a long-term basis. But there are also some that make it very accessible as well. And knowing how the market is in Argentina, it ends up being very easy for, I don't know, for argument's sake, let's talk Citigroup. I'll say Citigroup because it's recognizable, but obviously I'm not saying that they're doing this. I'm just giving you Citigroup as an example. And because they have acquired players in the recent past from Argentina. Citigroup decides to buy into a team that's available. Of course, there'll be, there's the whole process for that, or some clubs will have a voting process where things end up developing and all of that. Comes in, everything green lighted all the way through, they're in, and they are able to acquire certain players, and they spend little to nothing in doing so. Again, the little to nothing, that's maybe for another episode, because then all of a sudden this video becomes 3.5 hours long. and I start talking about more about the socioeconomic ramifications of Argentina, and I don't want to get into that. The amount of money that they have to invest in order to bring in a young player compared to the amount of money that they're going to spend maybe sending him over to Europe and maybe selling him to another club is a huge profit margin. So there's the business there. I want you to understand that in every facet. So there's no confusion in terms of what's going on. I'm gonna just cut this a little bit so you can get a little bit of what's going on. That's where business and football end up colliding in all of this. So when you start to see where the problem is okay, where's the return for us here in all of this? And that's where the SAD, these potential SAD, end up coming into conflict with Argentine football right now. Keep in mind, AFA a few months ago had a vote in which, not even a vote, this was actually not even a couple of months ago, a couple of days after Javier Milei took over as president, one of the first measures he did was to try and privatize football. AFA goes and says, no, it's not happening. And keep in mind that not only this, Javier Milei goes and talks to Gianni Infantino to try and see how he can go around the whole state involvement issue, which ends up being calamitous if Milei says, no, we're imposing this rule on, and all of a sudden FIFA says, no, you can't go in and do this because the state can't get involved in football or FA matters. So that's where that is. It's a situation that's completely and utterly unique, and it's a situation that is being resisted, and it's a situation that is ongoing and kind of has a bunch of moving parts to it, because like I said, not everyone's in favor, not everyone's against, knowing the realities of Argentine football. And if you start looking at it from within, it ends up being a very complex situation where some clubs will probably in a year or two or maybe 3 end up being private entities, and some will refuse. And one of the biggest issues in all of that, or one of the biggest clubs that ended up resisting, was Boca. And that's why there was so much emphasis put in the election last December, when Juan Román Riquelme wins basically almost 2-1 against former President Mauricio Macri and his candidate. That's where all of this ends up really coming to fruition for the big argument and the big battle that is the status quo, if you will, of Argentine football against not a new wave, but a wave of change that privatization brings forth, and where they promise that Argentine football will be if their path is taken. I hope that does answer your question completely. Now, the next question, and basically I'm going to paraphrase it, what makes Real Madrid so powerful and strong? That's a very good question, a simple question to kind of say in 3 words, but a kind of complex one to kind of analyze. But I'll do my best in terms of telling you why. I mean, first of all, it's a team that's demanded upon a lot, and we'll talk about the football matters first. It's a team that is expected to win every single game, every single time, every single trophy, every single year. When you have that demand placed upon you, now mind you, I'm talking about this, and I think a Madrid fan would probably be the best one to ask. I am not a Madrid fan, nor will I ever be, nor have I ever been. But from the outside looking in, there are a lot of things that you have to admire about Real Madrid and how they've been able to overcome certain things. I mean, they overcame a Barcelona team that had their best era ever, and yet they were able to still surpass them in terms of Champions Leagues. And they went through a pandemic where they saw many teams go into a financial slump, and they still were able to persevere. Not only persevere, they were able to make what is a legendary stadium even more legendary going into the 21st century and beyond, with one of the more modern stadiums in Europe, and maybe, if not even that, the entire world. So much so that they bring in the NFL. And I'm talking, of course, I have to jump back and forth from the football standpoint to the Financial because they go so hand in hand with one another. It's a team that constantly needs revamping, and if you're not up to snuff, you're gone. It sounds cruel, it sounds harsh, it sounds very businesslike and even cutthroat. And it kind of is. But if you look at what they've been able to do and how players are demanded upon to be able to perform, more often than not, they've been right in their transactions, in their transfers, in their arrivals. If you look at things and how they've been more right than wrong over the past 10 years. Now, if you go back maybe 10, 15 years, 15, 20 years, that ratio might have kind of evened out because there were some major flops for Real Madrid, but there were some great successes as well. Let's not deny that either. Of course, if you look at the Galacticos and what they were able to do, not only from a football standpoint, but also from a marketing one. What else? There's an ethos that has maintained itself throughout. That honestly, Madrid, if you're not the type of player that's willing to battle until the very last minute, even if you're losing 2-0, then Madrid's not the club for you, and you're not the player for them. There's a certain demand for Real Madrid players. There's a certain mentality that you have to have in order to play there. That's basically it. You cannot be the type of player that, we lost 2-0, all right, let's go. No. You go and you battle until the end. You go and you try and win that ball if you're still down 3-0. That's why I've said a lot of times that if you're beating Real Madrid in the 89th minute 3-0, you better make sure you make it 4. Because if you give them any daylight, the chances of them coming back and beating you are pretty, I don't know if they're pretty good, but they're going to come after you. And they could make something historic out of that moment. And you don't want to be that. The best way to beat Real Madrid is to keep beating them down. I mean, if you have your foot in their throat, make sure you break their neck. If you have them down 4-0, you better go and make it 5, just to make sure. So that is why I am so adamant every time I do a Real Madrid game or I'm talking about Real Madrid at Sports Max. Well, they didn't finish them off. And they were winning 3-1. They didn't finish them off. They were winning 1-0. No, they should have been 2-0. It should have been this. It should have been that. That's the mentality you have, because those are the players that come to Real Madrid, or at least they change and understand what it takes for them to remain at Real Madrid. Because mind you stay at a club like that, you want to be there. It's one of the clubs that if you get there, you want to make sure you stay there as long as possible. So I hope that you understand exactly what I'm talking about when I say this, because it is a very huge bar in which you are measured at Madrid. You are measured at Madrid on the way you practice, on the way you play, on the way you act, on the way you move around town, on who you talk to, on who you don't talk to. You are looked at in a microscope like no other microscope. I mean, you might be looked at in places with a scientific microscope. At Real Madrid, you're looked at with a telescope looking to see all 7 moons in Jupiter, or however many moons they have over there. That's how close and how meticulous they are. And sometimes they don't even look at the football facet of you. They look at what you're able to do outside. How he moves to the right, how he moves to the left. He didn't move like this instead of moving like that. That's how intense the scrutiny is to be. And you have to have a certain skin. You have to have a certain mentality. You have to have a certain comportment when you play at Real Madrid. And they pick more often than other players that fit the bill. Now, with Kylian Mbappe coming in, with Alphonso Davies most likely coming in, and with Endrick coming in, it's a team that doesn't get older. It ends up getting maybe just a tad younger. And you end up having players that are mature, that understand what needs to be done. And it's a team that's no nonsense, with a coach that's no nonsense. I mean, as much as you want to say that Carlo Ancelotti is a father figure to many of these players, well, sometimes a father figure has to give you a swift kick in the ass, and he's willing to do that. And he's done that before. And there have been players that have come in and haven't been up to snuff, and they've been, given their marching orders. So that's what makes Real Madrid what Real Madrid is. And this season they showed it. This season they've shown it. And this season they could win their 15th Champions League. Obviously, you still have to wait and see what happens, because the games obviously still do have to be played. So, okay, that's this week's edition of AMA. Like I said before, I'd love to be able to do these once a week. It all depends on demand and how many questions come in, or how many interesting questions do come in, or how many questions don't get repeated over and over again. Send them. Leave your comments. I'll ask your question or answer your questions as best as possible. I'll see what I can do to be able to give you as best an answer as possible. And again, look, I don't ask for much. Like I said before, I don't ask for much. I do ask to subscribe. You don't have to do it. If you do, that's great. I'm grateful to, you don't know how many measures. I am extremely grateful for any comment, for any feedback, for any like, for any subscription that you do. I'm like I said, it's a pleasure. You don't have to do it. You do it because you choose to, and you choosing to do so helps me get closer and closer to an objective of, well, doing things like this, but elsewhere, going and visiting people, going and talking to people that I've always wanted to interview, and going and covering events I've always wanted to cover, whether it's something cool and popular or something exotic and different when it comes to the world of football, because it's something that I want to start doing eventually, but of course with your support it would be a lot easier to do so. And most importantly, I'd like to be able to get to a point where I can start doing match commentary here on this channel to continue offering more football. Remember, this is a one-man show, folks. This is just me and me alone working on this, but I want to be me and me alone working on this, doing what I love, doing what I enjoy, and most importantly, doing everything I can to offer you as much content as possible. And like I said, match commentary included. And I'd love to be able to hear from you, and I'd like to be able to know more, and I'd like to be able to build off of that, to be able to offer you as much as possible in the world of football. And of course, on this little humble channel, I hope I can do that to the best of my ability. So I'll talk to you soon, ladies, gentlemen, everyone. Ciao.